Hey guys, this is Ricky from Worst Friends Play, and I just wanted to make a quick video kind of showcasing a game I'm designing. It's a zombie survival deck building game that I just kind of came up with at some point in my head, and I created some quick mock-up cards and put it all in Tabletop Simulator so that I could show the general idea of how to play it and how it would look being played to the other guys in the group and other friends and people that might be interested. Because I'm kind of hoping to put this out on Kickstarter or something and maybe seeing if there's a desire for it and possibly market it, find a publisher. I have no idea. But I just wanted to do a quick video. Just keep in mind that all the designs are completely subject to change. The only real thing that I have solid is the rules and how I want it to be played in general. So the basic idea of the game is that there's anywhere from 1 to 6 players. Obviously, difficulties range depending on which mission you're doing, how many missions you're doing, and how many players you're doing for specific missions. I kind of created a default mission that is just kind of for tutorial purposes, which is just purely to survive. Just play the game for a certain amount of rounds, and if you live to the end of the, specific number of rounds required, depending on how many players there are, then you just win. There's no like specific agenda or even really a story necessarily. But I kind of built the game. Right now, it's all very cookie cutter, generic stuff. But I'm kind of hoping for the end cards to have like subtle journal entries and text and lore and stuff, so that as you play the game, it's almost like the decks are dungeon mastering for you. So you and your friends, as you play, kind of come up with this story that's randomly developed as you play every time. So the way the game is built is there are 4 decks to worry about, not including your own deck, which is what you use to play. Every player would pick a character to represent their survivor. So I'll just take the first one off the top here. All these test characters I created are made from generic, stereotypical characters that you find in a lot of zombie survival scenarios. And just to get an idea and people would be familiar with it, I decided to use characters from actual pop culture and fiction that has to do with zombies. So Takashi Kamuro is from High School of the Dead. It's a very popular manga turned anime series about a high school in Japan and students from that high school surviving as Japan is taken over by the undead. But enough about that. So basically, the idea behind Takashi is there are 6 traits that the entire game revolves around. We have strength, logic, agility, calm, favored, and outcast. So on the card, if they are lit up in color, which in this case is strength, favored, and outcast, those are the 3 strengths that that character has, which means it's probably going to be a lot easier for him to use and take advantage of cards that need that trait. His 2 weaknesses are calm and logical, necessarily meaning that he's not specifically smart or majorly intelligent in any way, so it's not a huge advantage for him. It's actually kind of one of his weaknesses, and he's not that calm, which means that when things would get pretty hectic, or if a major event happens that would require someone to stay calm in order to achieve the goal, he's probably not going to shine there. It's not impossible. There are cards that will allow you to take advantage of your weaknesses as well. They're just going to be a lot harder for the players to obtain. And then the grayed out symbol, which every symbol is represented by a coin or lack thereof, is his neutral trait, which means that there are certain cards that would specifically require the neutral trait. There are certain cards that will allow you to gain specifically your weaknesses or gain specifically your strengths. And when you have your neutral ability, it means that if it asks for a weakness, you can also use your neutral towards it. But if it asks for your strength, then you cannot. The main deck that you're usually going to take from is the fortune deck. So depending on the amount of players there are, depends on what you start with as a fortune deck. So if you're playing with 2 players, then you take 2 times the amount of survivors that are being played. So that's 2 survivors, which means the fortune deck would start out with 20 cards. So in this case, I would take 20 cards from the top, which has already been shuffled. And then I would pretty much use that as my starting deck, shuffle it up a little bit, and then just place it there. And every turn, depending on how many people you have, which in this case is two, there would become a library of fortune cards for you and the other survivors to purchase from for that round. So at the beginning of the round, one of the first things you do is reveal that many. So if there's two players, you reveal one card, two card, and then plus one. So if there's six players, you'd be revealing 7 cards per round. And then these are the cards that you have that are basically things that you could find or skills that you could obtain on your turn using the currencies that you gain in your deck. For those of you familiar with deck building games, it's pretty simple rules. Every card you have in your hand usually generates a type of resource, and all the resources are based off of character traits. They're used as currency to buy from the fortune deck and to fight against the pain deck and the punishment decks. But they are not literal currency. They are, the idea of the currency is that it's a certain trait or skill that you have, and your affinity towards those skills or possible weaknesses is what allows you to gain certain types of items or specific skills. So in this case, we have things like the screwdriver, I survive for my friends, which is just a skill, and then the baseball bat, which is a two-handed weapon. So you start out with an 8-card deck, and everyone starts out with the same 8-card deck that uses these generic cards. The starting deck tends to favor your affinities, which are your strengths. This symbol next to the gain is to say that it uses the card, which means that when you use the card, it goes into your own discard pile, which would allow you to eventually reuse the card. There are other symbols, like the one at the bottom of this one where it says gain 2 strength towards a zombie card. That symbol means destroy the card. So it would remove the card from the game completely, which means it won't be able to be recovered or obtained by anybody else. It won't go back into the fortune deck at any point, and it wouldn't go back into your hand. But that's if you're deciding to sacrifice the screwdriver in order to gain that skill from it. Otherwise, you could use the top ability, which is just to use the card normally. This symbol right here with the 3 and the black card is a charge symbol. Charges are used on equipment and weapons, which is basically every time you take advantage of that ability, 1 charge is used up. Once the charge reaches zeros, the ability of the card is no longer usable, and the item is discarded. So the idea is oh, you found a baseball bat, then you use it, and you never repaired it, so eventually it broke. So it goes back into the fortune deck, which eventually could come up again, and it's like somebody else finding another baseball bat. And then skill cards are generally all the time going to go into your regular discard pile, which means that skills are the most commonly reused cards over and over again. So they really help you build a foundation of what your deck does, where equipments don't go into your deck, they get attached to your character. The symbols that it's asking for baseball bat is 2 of any kind of trait. So I could just use this card right here, which is just to gain 2 of any of my affinities. So I could just say strength or favored or outcast or whatever. So I would use that card from my hand and say that I'm using those 2 affinities to gain the 2 traits that I need to obtain this baseball bat, which would then put it into my equipment as a 2-handed weapon, which means that I can't hold any other weapons because both of my hands are focused on this one weapon. The 2 things you're worrying about is every player has to play against the pain deck on their turn during the round. But every player works together to beat the 1 card revealed by the punishment deck during the round. So the punishment deck and the travel decks are determined by the mission. The travel deck count is usually how many cards are possible to be in the travel deck, which is going to be all the locations that could be involved in your story. The MAL is max available locations. That's how many can be on the track. So if you have a max of 3, and you draw a 4th travel card, then the oldest travel card, which is a location, has to be destroyed, which is basically the idea that your group is moving on permanently in one direction and will no longer go that far back. And then the punishment deck is the big bads. They are the bosses, they are the crazy killer psychos, they are the major events that happen to everybody in the team that they all have to work towards beating, otherwise bad stuff's usually going to happen to everybody, or a significant amount of bad stuff is going to happen to one person because everyone didn't decide to help them. we would reveal the punishment card that everyone has to worry about this round, which in this case is called the Bride and the Groom. It's a psychopath enemy card. The idea behind it is that there's a bride and groom. They're regular people. They are living, but they've become psychopath, which means that they will try to kill everybody no matter what. These are not people just trying to make it. They are people literally out to murder you and your friends. You can pay 3 agility to shuffle this card back into the punishment deck. Usually when you're paying agility, it's to escape or to be stealthy. So by shuffling this card back into the punishment deck, it means that just because you ran away, the bride and groom might show up again because they're going to actively chase you. Or you could pay 3 strength and 2 calm to defeat the card, which would just discard it normally. And what this means is usually strength is associated with attacking and fighting all the creatures. So strong heroes are usually going to be okay with that. Heroes that don't have the strength trait as an affinity are probably going to have a hard time fighting off zombies on their own. So in this case, if you got a bride and a groom, one with a shotgun, the other one with a flamethrower, and they're being psycho and they're coming after you, you need to have the muscle, but you also need to remain calm in order to take these guys down, because if you panic, then you give them the advantage. If you're not able to escape as a team and you're not able to defeat them as a team, then everybody takes some damage. And everybody in the game, other than specific characters that say otherwise, can only take 10 damage before they're considered collapsed. If you've ever played games like Left 4 Dead, then you'll be familiar with the idea that if something gets you, or if you get knocked down because you've taken so much damage, then you can't do anything, basically, until somebody else heals you. So the idea in this game is if you take 10 damage, you're collapsed, another player needs to get to the location that you're at, if they're not already there, and use an item or an ability that heals in order to take you out of the collapse state so that you can continue fighting. Because if you're in the collapse state and you take any kind of damage whatsoever, then you are dead. It's pretty much you've been considered helpless, you got caught by a zombie person, whatever, and you couldn't do anything about it, so you died. On the first player's turn, they would draw the first pain card. And this is a card that they specifically are having to deal with. In this case, it's a zombie dog, so it just takes 2 strength to defeat it, 3 agility to escape it, or you take 2 damage specifically to yourself. If the enemy is defeated without a gun weapon, then you still take 1 damage. So if you try to kill it with a bat or a machete or something like that, and you didn't use any gun weapons to gain strength towards defeating this card, then the idea is that the dog still got a claw on you, still got a bite, whatever. So each player has to deal with their own pain card, and usually the other players can't help them towards that. It's a specific quick event that's happening to them immediately. It's something you need to be able to solve on your own. But for the punishment card, that's kind of like the problem of the day. So even though everyone in this round is going to have their own little problems to deal with, you all need to work towards the fact that this punishment card is a problem that needs to either be resolved or everyone suffers. And then for the travel deck, on the first round, you always play 1 travel card, and that's where every survivor starts at. So here we have the auto body shop, so that's where every survivor would start. And then during the beginning of the round, they would be able to pay 1 agility each in order to pull out a new travel location. And what that would do is it would move the older one down the line, the new one there. So now we have the auto body shop, but we've also discovered the dive bar. Every location has specific abilities or traits that can be taken advantage of. When a new location is shown, then the decks get mixed up a little. So for the fortune deck, when a new location's drawn, you add 5 fortune cards to the existing fortune deck. And what this does is it's kind of like opening up new items, new things. So even if you've gone through the entire fortune deck already and you're like, oh, we had no guns, we had no, weapons, we have no armor or whatever, then it means that your group needs to move on, because by revealing more locations, you just mixed more cards into the fortune deck, which means on subsequent rounds, you're going to have new items that pop up in the game. So when all the cards have been played and they all end up in the pain discard, then if the game is still going and you haven't finished the mission, the pain deck doesn't mean you lose the game. It just means that everything that's in there already would get shuffled, and the next person would just draw the next pain card. So usually in most games, unless the goal is to specifically run out the entire punishment discard deck, if the punishment discards become full, which means that the punishment deck is empty and there's no more punishment cards, that means that you probably lost the game. So the punishment card is also kind of the limiter of the game. So for people that are only wanting to pay like a quick 20-minute game or 15 minutes, or they got time for hours or whatever, they can decide on a mission that has a high punishment count whether they want more rounds or less rounds, because that's going to determine the lifespan of the specific game. So in this case, so it would be the first round. I have my location revealed. Everyone starts at that location. So my character, which is represented by my little white token here, rather than putting my card all the way up there, is here at the auto body shop. I 3 cards out: baseball bat, screwdriver, and I survive for my friends, for me and the other survivor to purchase from this round. And then we have the punishment card, the bride and the groom, for this round, which is what me and the other guy would have to work towards beating. And then me going first, would draw the first pain card, and that's my problem for this turn. So I draw 4 cards, and that's my starting hand. So in this case, I have one that gives me 2 of my neutral. So I have gained 2 of an affinity, 2 of those, gained 1 of an affinity, and then gained 2 neutrals. So I look at my options here and I say, okay, well, I'm either using my neutrals or I'm using my affinities. So I can either use the agility, the strength, the favored, or the outcast with my cards. I'm not going to get to use any of the calm or any of the logical. So looking at my options here, automatically I'm not able to buy this card at all because I don't have any way to obtain the calm currency. I could buy a screwdriver because I could get 2 of anything for the screwdriver, or I could go for the baseball bat, which costs the same and is possibly more useful in the long run. The idea is that with the screwdriver, if I already have weapons equipped, the screwdriver can still go into my hand and be used at any point to do the abilities that I needed to use. It's a consumable item as opposed to an equipped item. And then I have to deal with the escaping amateurs, which isn't too bad of a problem necessarily. If I pay 2 favored, then the idea is that I play a new location to travel to it and discard this card, which is basically I escort them to a new place. Which will add to the fortune deck, it'll add to the pain deck, and it'll automatically move me. But nothing else bad happens. There's nothing bad happened at all, actually. It was basically I used the favored trait to my advantage in order to get them to where they needed to go. Or I could use the outcast trait, which is kind of the bad version of dealing with people, to take advantage of the fact that there are escaping amateurs. And I would gain 4 of any of my strengths towards any fortune card. So this would help me I'm basically taking advantage of the distraction that they're creating. So you see people running off in the distance and they're making a lot of noise and they're panicking because they don't know what the hell they're doing. So you take advantage of the fact that the zombies and stuff are all being drawn to them, and you're able to obtain a card because you're able to find something basically for free because you didn't have to do anything because everything's distracted. But if you don't have the know-how, which in this case is using the outcast trait to do that, and you just kind of see escaping amateurs panicking and you don't do anything about it, whether it's taking advantage of it or not, then it plays 2 pain cards, which means that now I have even more problems to deal with. So if I don't pay either one of these, then I would also be having to deal with this and this all on my turn. If you guys can't beat this card, then the player that drew this card is going to put this card in their deck as an injury, which goes into their discard. And when my discard gets shuffled, it's going to be in there. And when I draw it, it literally serves as an injury, which means it's just a waste of a card in my hand. So I could have had any other card in that point that would have been an extra skill, possibly an item. But in this case, the fact that I have a twisted ankle just seems to be flaring up at this moment. So it's causing a problem for me. But not only am I having to deal with the heavy rain, I'm also having to deal with a lot of runners, which in this case is a very dangerous card because it's expensive to beat, and if I don't beat it, I take 4 damage. In this specific case, other survivors at my location may assist in defeating the enemy, but in order to defeat these enemies, anyone that wants to put in on it needs to be using a gun weapon. So basically, trying to go at these runners with like a baseball bat or a machete or whatever is not going to work because they have overwhelming numbers. So if I don't have a gun weapon and I don't use that gun weapon's ability to gain strength towards this fight, then all I can do is either try to outrun the zombies, which is using 4 of the agility, or I have to take 4 damage myself. But not only do I have to deal with these problems on my own, When I finish dealing with whatever I decide I'm going to deal with and take the damage of whatever I decide I'm not going to deal with, at the end of the round, me and all the other survivors going to use our remaining cards to try to beat this card. Otherwise, everyone suffers. And that's basically every turn in the game. So every turn in the game, you're going to deal with your own pain. And then at the end of every round, the entire team deals with the punishment. There are multiple locations you can travel to, which, mix up the game a little bit. All the cards that you pull from are always random. So you could play the same mission with the same survivors, the same amount of survivors, but the fortune cards, the pain cards, and the punishment cards that you get every game are going to be completely different. So the game just infinitely rewrites itself, and it's a different story every time. So whether you're trying to just survive or you play one of the few other missions, like there are some missions that are very specific. Like this one is the Bone Carver, and the entire game is built around defeating one specific psycho in the punishment deck. He's really hard to defeat. He has a lot of things that allow him to come back, so if you don't defeat him permanently, that it's still a problem. But even though you could be the same people trying to kill the same bad guy, like he's a Jason Voorhees or he's Freddy Krueger or whatever the hell, but because of the pain and the fortune decks and the location decks and everything else being mixed up randomly, it's going to make a new story for you every time. And that's basically the general gist of the game. I'm trying to come up with as many unique rules as I can without complicating the rules, because the idea behind this game is for it to be a simple get up and go play game. I play a lot of other deck building games, and my favorite is Marvel Legendary, but that game requires an insane amount of setup. There's very specific hero cards and villain cards and groups and everything mixed and matched, so much so that most people have to use an app on their phone in order to generate all the nonsense for them and tell them specifically what to grab. Otherwise, setup can take 15, 20, 30 minutes. And by that time, you might have your friends already getting bored because they're tired of waiting for you to finish setting up the game. And we have a lot of that with the games that we play on our board game nights and stuff. So I decided to come up with a game of my own that would be simple enough that it would pretty much, as long as you have your cards already like separated as far as fortune decks and pain, punishment, and travel and all that, you just read the mission card. It says specifically there's 9 cards plus the falls for the travel deck. There's 22 minus the player count plus Scrimshaw for the punishment deck. So it'd be, for 2 players, it'd be 20 plus Scrimshaw, so it'd be 21 cards. So that's a maximum 21 rounds. You find Scrimshaw, and then you just draw another 20 random cards. And you just draw the amount that it says for the mission you decided to play, and then you just go. And all of these specific spots and settings wouldn't be in the final game. This is just a diagram so that people that don't know how to play the game have a fairly obvious place to where to put all their cards, but it's not definite. They could have their punishment decks and pain decks, and everyone that's played card games before is going to have their own style on how they like to set up their own hands, how they like to set up their decks and their discard piles and whatnot. So I just created this to make it a fairly obvious for everybody playing in this tabletop simulator game of where everything is. But in the real game, it would all be completely up to you to decide where you want to put that stuff and how you want to lay it out. But yeah, that's basically my idea. The game for itself would be entirely made of cards. There's only 10 damage, so you could either use dice or you could use whatever counters you wanted to determine your health. But for the most part, the entire game would only come with the cards, because that's all you necessarily need to play. Nothing else is too complicated to keep track of. There's no rolling dice or flipping coins or any of that, crazy stuff that requires you to have a bunch of crazy pieces. I might include stuff like that with certain versions of the Kickstarter. So for certain people that want that, if they invest a certain amount, could get a copy of the game that comes with miniatures for the survivors, maybe, dice counters that have specific symbols for the amount of health or whatever cool little things I could come up with. But for the most part, the base game would just be a simple, low-cost card game that is pretty easy to play once you understand the idea of using your traits as currency, and just have these self-generating missions. But that's it. Everything here that you see is the general gist of the idea, but it's not the permanent version of the idea. I'd love to have other, designers take a look at the cards and see if we can find a more efficient way to get the information across. The designs might change, the layouts might change, but the general rules won't. I don't even have a name for this game yet. I've just been calling it my Alpha Zombie TBG deck building game. But once I get a more tested and finalized version of the game, as far as the rules are concerned at least, then I'll probably open it up on Tabletop Simulator for anybody to play test it. If you want, just comment on the video and we can look into getting that done sooner than later if people are actually interested in trying this. So I'm kind of excited about it. I hope other people get excited about it because as far as I know, there aren't any other games that are specifically like it. But when it comes to just this randomly generated zombie survival adventure with the deck building element, I think it's a really unique take on it. And I'm excited to see what other people think about it. So thanks for watching. I will do my best to respond to any questions in the comments below.